The garden gnome sailed through the air with surprising grace before crashing through Patricia Wilkinson's living room window. The shattering of glass was followed by a piercing scream that made the entire cul-de-sac freeze. Standing on the perfectly manicured lawn, Karen Helmsley, president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association, was still in her throwing stance, her face a thundercloud of righteous indignation. "I warned you 3 times about unauthorized lawn ornaments, Patricia," Karen shouted, her blonde bob haircut not moving an inch despite her exertion. Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states, Patricia emerged from her house, glass fragments glittering in her gray hair. "You've lost your mind, Karen. That's destruction of property." Karen straightened her beige cardigan, already reaching for her phone. "And your tacky gnome collection is destruction of our property values. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting." 5 neighbors peered from behind curtains and fences, filming discreetly. Within 20 minutes, #Gnomegate was trending locally. For Karen Helmsley, this wasn't just about gnomes. It was about order. At 52, she'd spent the last 7 years transforming Sunnyside Estates from a charming but irregular collection of homes into a beige and taupe masterpiece of conformity. The homeowners had elected her unanimously, mostly because no one else wanted the job, but Karen took it as a mandate. "You think I enjoy this?" She'd ask her husband Gerald over dinner. "Someone has to maintain standards." Gerald would nod absently, having learned years ago that Karen's questions were rhetorical. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was standing room only. Karen had never seen such attendance, not even when she proposed the controversial ban on wind chimes. "Order, please." Karen rapped her gavel sharply. "We're here to discuss the flagrant violation of—" "We're here to discuss you throwing a garden gnome through Patricia's window," interrupted Dave from number 37, who'd previously been too intimidated to speak at meetings. Karen's mouth formed a tight line. "That gnome was in violation. You're in violation," called someone from the back, "of sanity." The room erupted in laughter and Karen felt something unfamiliar, a hot flush of embarrassment crawling up her neck. This wasn't following protocol at all. Patricia stood, bandaged hand raised. "I move that we vote on Karen's removal as HOA president, effective immediately." Karen gasped. "That's not on the agenda. We can't." "Second," called 5 voices simultaneously. Gerald, seated in the back corner, studied his shoes intently. As the vote proceeded, overwhelmingly against her, Karen felt her carefully ordered world crumbling. 7 years of dedication, of color-matched mailboxes and regulation-height fences, erased in minutes. When the final tally was announced, she stood mechanically, gathered her binder of bylaws, and walked out with as much dignity as she could muster. At home, she poured herself an uncharacteristic second glass of Chardonnay. "They'll regret this," she told Gerald. "When the neighborhood goes to hell, they'll come crawling back." Gerald finally looked up. "Karen, you threw a gnome through a window. Even I think that's crazy." She stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Are you saying I've become unreasonable?" "I'm saying you've turned into someone who thinks violence against lawn ornaments is justified." Karen looked down at her hands, seeing the small cuts from glass fragments she hadn't noticed in her rage. What had she become? And more importantly, who was she now without her position of authority? The answer came at 7 a.m. the next morning, when she opened her front door to find 30 garden gnomes arranged in silent judgment on her immaculate lawn. As the party wound down, Dave from number 37, who no longer crossed the street to avoid her, approached with a gift bag. "The neighborhood wanted you to have this," he said, still a bit wary. Inside was a garden gnome, but not just any gnome. This one wore a tiny beige cardigan and had a miniature clipboard in hand. The nameplate read, "Karen, Guardian of the Neighborhood." Karen burst out laughing, tears springing to her eyes. "I don't know whether to be honored or mortified." "Both is good," Patricia said, joining them. "We need a Karen sometimes, just not all the time, and not for the lawn ornaments." Later that night, as the last guests departed, Karen placed the gnome in her front garden, a clear violation of the HOA bylaws she had once enforced with an iron fist. What would the old Karen say? Gerald mused, putting an arm around her shoulders. Karen considered this, watching the moonlight glint off her gnome doppelganger. She'd say proper channels weren't followed and Form 27B needs to be submitted in triplicate. And what does the new Karen say? She leaned against him, feeling contentment settle around her like a comfortable blanket. That sometimes the rules matter, and sometimes they don't. The trick is knowing the difference. As they turned to go inside, Karen noticed the Hendersons' new atrocious plastic flamingo glowing faintly in the darkness across the street. She felt the familiar twitch of her citation writing finger, then deliberately relaxed it. Tomorrow, she'd focus on the waste plant battle. The flamingo could stay. For now, the invitation to rejoin the HOA board came 6 months after nominate. Karen stared at the email, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You're not actually considering it," Gerald said, reading over her shoulder. His tone made it less a question, more a prayer. "They need help with the pool renovation budget," Karen replied, trying to sound casual. "Just as a consultant." Gerald's eyebrows nearly disappeared into his hairline. "Karen, honey, you're like an alcoholic being asked to tend bar. Nothing good can come from this." Deep down, Karen knew he was right. Her transformation from neighborhood tyrant to community gardener had been genuine but fragile. The old Karen, the one who measured grass height with a ruler, still whispered to her sometimes, especially when she drove past the Hendersons' increasingly chaotic front yard. "I could help without taking charge," she insisted. "Like you helped with the community center fundraiser?" Gerald reminded her gently. Karen winced at the memory. She'd volunteered to assist, then somehow ended up redesigning the entire event, creating color-coded spreadsheets for volunteer shifts, and sending 3 AM emails about proper buffet arrangement. She'd caught herself just before ordering matching t-shirts without consultation. "Fine," she sighed, deleting the email. "You're right." But the request had awakened something. Karen needed a project, a place to channel her formidable organizational energy. The garden club wasn't enough. The local library had banned her after she'd reorganized an entire shelf using her own improved classification system. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Patricia, now a close friend despite their rocky beginning, arrived at Karen's door looking harried. "They're trying to put a waste processing plant at the edge of the neighborhood," she announced without preamble. "The city council approved it quietly last month." Karen felt a familiar fire ignite. "They can't do that. The environmental impact alone." "Exactly," Patricia nodded. "We need someone who knows how to fight bureaucracy with bureaucracy. Someone detail-oriented and, frankly, terrifying when crossed." A slow smile spread across Karen's face. "Are you saying you need the old Karen?" "I'm saying we need your powers for good, not evil." Within 48 hours, Karen had organized a neighborhood coalition, researched environmental regulations, filed 3 different appeals, and created a social media campaign that was gaining traction. The same neighbors who had once hidden from her now gratefully accepted her leadership. At the city council meeting, Karen stood at the podium, her presentation immaculate, her arguments bulletproof. She wasn't fighting for property values now, but for the health and safety of families, including those in the less affluent neighborhood that would bear the brunt of the plant's impact. In conclusion, she finished, fixing the council with her most intimidating stare. "We are prepared to escalate this to state-level environmental authorities and pursue legal action if necessary." The waste management company representative looked nervous. The council members exchanged glances. "We'll reconsider the location," the mayor finally conceded. The victory celebration at Karen and Gerald's house that night brought together neighbors who had barely spoken before the crisis. Karen found herself in her element, but in a new way, hosting, connecting people, using her powers of organization to build community rather than control it. For 3 days, Karen didn't leave the house. She peered through the blinds as neighbors walked by, pointing and laughing at what had become known as the Gnome Tribunal on her lawn. Each time she gathered the courage to go remove them, someone would walk by, and she'd retreat into the shadows. "This is ridiculous," Gerald finally said over breakfast on day 4. Either go clean up your mess or make peace with it. Make peace with lawn gnomes. Karen clutched her pearls reflexively. Who even are you anymore? Gerald sighed, folding his newspaper. I could ask you the same question. For years I've watched you terrorize this neighborhood in the name of property values. Maybe it's time to consider that people want to actually live in their homes, not just maintain them. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times. I was making this neighborhood better. Were you? Or were you just making it more like what you wanted? The question hit Karen like another shattered window. She walked to her office, formerly the HOA Command Center, and looked at the wall of citations she'd issued. Christmas lights in February, basketball hoops visible from the street, unapproved bird feeders, each infraction meticulously documented, like trophies from some bizarre hunting expedition. When had her desire for a nice neighborhood transformed into this crusade? That afternoon, Karen did the unthinkable. She walked out her front door in broad daylight, straight into the judging gaze of the gnome tribunal. Mr. Abernathy from across the street nearly dropped his hose in shock. Karen approached the nearest gnome, a cheerful fellow with a red hat, and picked it up. Instead of throwing it, she carefully placed it in a cardboard box she'd brought out. One by one, she collected each gnome, feeling the weight of her neighbor's stares. When Patricia emerged from her house, arms crossed defensively, Karen steeled herself. I've come to return your property, Karen said, her voice smaller than she'd intended, and to pay for your window, of course. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. Is this some kind of trick? It's an apology. The words felt foreign in Karen's mouth. I was wrong. The street went so quiet Karen could hear the sprinklers 3 houses down. Well, Patricia finally said, that must have hurt to say. Like passing a kidney stone, Karen admitted, and to her surprise, Patricia laughed. That laugh broke something open in Karen, a crack in the fortress she'd built around herself. I don't suppose. You might want to come in for coffee. I make terrible small talk, but excellent banana bread. 3 hours later, Gerald returned home to find Karen and Patricia at the kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumbs, laughing like old friends. And then I said, it's not a pink flamingo, it's a sunset rose yard enhancement. Patricia howled, slapping the table. Karen wiped tears from her eyes. I can't believe I fell for that. Gerald backed out silently, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a minor miracle. Over the next weeks, Karen underwent a transformation more dramatic than any home renovation she'd ever supervised. She started a neighborhood gardening club that celebrated diversity of plants rather than conformity. She helped organize the first-ever Sunnyside block party, where she publicly apologized for her reign of terror and unveiled a community project, a shared garden space where, yes, tasteful garden ornaments were welcome. Not everyone forgave her immediately. Dave from number 37 still crossed the street to avoid her, and the Hendersons pointedly installed the brightest wind chimes they could find. But slowly, Karen was rebuilding bridges she hadn't even realized she'd burned. You seem happier, Gerald observed one evening as they sat on their porch, something they'd never done in the HOA days. Karen considered this. I think I am. It's exhausting being the neighborhood villain. So what's next for the reformed Karen Helmsley? She smiled mysteriously. I've been thinking about running for city council. Gerald nearly choked on his drink. Please tell me you're joking. Don't worry, Karen patted his hand. I've learned my lesson. No more dictatorial tendencies. But as she rocked gently, watching the sunset over her changing neighborhood, Karen couldn't help but think about all the improvements the city council could use.